Hi, hope you're well. My name is Paul Nolan. I'm a police sergeant from Greater Manchester. I've been a police officer for about 22 years. I've been invited to do a short piece of camera about knife and gun crime, which we're going to do. I'm going to come at this slightly differently than normal for police officers. And we're going to talk around legislation. We're going to talk about some of the myths around knife crime and gun carrying. We're going to talk about the effects it can have on you and where you sit in all this process, because you do sit centrally to it. So, why should you listen to me? Well, apart from having 22 years as a police officer and seeing firsthand the effects of knife and gun crime, at some point in my life, I was like you, I was a student. And some of the pressures that you are under as a student and a young person within Greater Manchester, I've experienced that. And I think when you listen to the presentations that you're going to hear from Pos, from 84 Youth, from Dave, and Youth Justice in Bolton, the one thing that I hope comes through is that we understand those pressures, and actually a lot of the work that we do are about addressing and coping with those pressures as well, and that's really important. So let's have a look at the legislation. But before we do, one really important part, and I want you to remember this. If you remember nothing else, remember this. So 99% of the people that you know, that you go to college with, that you're in your communities in Bolton, in Greater Manchester, 99% of the people that you know will never consider carrying a weapon, whether that's a knife or a firearm. It's really important that in today's world of social media and mainstream media, we can start to think that crime is around every corner. And actually, some of the things we'll talk about around adverse childhood experience and toxic stress kind of make you understand why some people carry a knife, certainly victims. So bear that in mind. So 99% of the people you know won't even consider carrying a knife or a firearm. So hold on to that. So legislation. There is loads of legislation to cover unlicensed firearms, licensed firearms when it can and can't be carried, covers knives, covers weapons, covers things that you wouldn't think are a weapon until they're being used or intended to use for harm. Really complicated work. So what I want to do is, one, signpost you. If you're ever interested in learning more, the theorists of you who want to learn more about knife and gun crime, the government website, legislation.gov, is a really good place to start. Have a look on that site. You're looking at the Offensive Weapons Act, you're looking at the Criminal Justice Act. If you type those in, they'll start telling you about the importation of weapons, the use of weapons, etc., etc. So spend some time if you want to find out about knives. Have a look on there. What I would say is, if in your course or in your employment you use a knife, and what will centre around knives, then it will be very obvious when legally you can hold that weapon. So it will cover you from home to work. It will cover you from work to home. What it won't cover you is when you're in your dinner hour and you're out shopping. What it doesn't cover is 3 hours after work when it's in your car because you're not taking it home. So for example, people in the catering industry, if they need to use knives as part of their day work, then they need to use knives. But there are stated cases. One in particular was a butcher. Stopped at night in his car, had his knives in the footwell, and told the officers he was having them there because in the morning he was going to get them sharpened. The judge decided that actually what the butcher should have done is keep them in his house, and as and when he was going to work in the morning, he should have then taken the weapons with him. So bear that in mind. It's really clear. If there is a point in your life when you have a knife on you and you're thinking, is it legal or is it not? The chances are it's not legal. So work with that. So that's legislation. Loads of different moving parts there. So unlicensed firearms. If you have an unlicensed firearm, I would like to think that everybody within this audience understands that there's something there that might be illegal. And we're looking at shotguns. So if you're borrowing a shotgun off someone, you should be with a license holder. They should have a certificate and it should be in a place that allows you to do that. Again, can be really complicated as to how you carry it, whether it should be secured or not secured. But I'd like to think that everyone within this audience would understand if you've got a knife in public, an unlicensed firearm in public, the chances are that you shouldn't have it. Brilliant. Right, let's have a look at some of the myths. And this is really interesting, and this is where I might have a slightly different take. I work in the violence reduction unit and I look at things. So some of the things I'm going to talk about are toxic stress, adverse childhood experiences, pressure that you'll be under as a young person. What these don't do is excuse poor behaviour, but what they do is give you some insight into why that person may be carrying a weapon. So let's start with suspects. Let's start with the person that wants to commit a robbery and takes a weapon, let's say a knife, with them in order to commit that robbery. So that's an offence. What I would say to you is, when you look at that suspect, and again, doesn't excuse the behaviour, but when you look at that suspect, when you look at some of the family history, when you look at the community history where they're from, what you will see are violent events. And what we see is that the more people are subjected to violent events when they are young, adverse childhood experiences, and violence would sit under that, whether it's domestic abuse, domestic neglect, or violence within a peer group, what you see is that person is more likely to be violent as they get older. So actually, in some cases, when you look at our suspects, especially the violent ones, there's a history of domestic abuse and violence throughout their life. Let's look at victims. So quite a high percentage of our knife carriers have been victims of violence previously. And although in their mind they might justify the carrying of that weapon as a way of putting the offender off hurting them again, so used as a defensive tool, actually what you see is that a high percentage of those people are actually injured with their own knives. And what you find is that people that present weapons in that particular time and place are normally subject to some form of violence, and then from that violence either a weapon is used or the violence is escalated because the victim has produced a weapon. So I suppose even if you've got friends that have been the victims of robbery before and you know that they're carrying around a weapon, whether it's a taser, something that they bought online that's illegal, or whether it's a knife that they have, or some other thing that they might have just to have as a defensive tool, then I would say as a good friend, you need to have that conversation, because a high percentage of those people are injured. So please bear that in mind. Let's have a look at some of the other reasons. So do all bad guys carry weapons? Are the only people with knives suspects? And I would probably say that that's a no. A large percentage of our young community, our 18 to 25 age group in particular, suffer from pressures of society that manifest as mental health. And sometimes people carry weapons in order to self-harm, or people carry weapons because of some of the stresses that they're going through. So again, one of the urban myths is that bad guys carry weapons. Actually, a lot of our victims, a lot of our people with anxiety, with mental health, will carry weapons as well, because they perceive the level of crime to be higher than it is. And that takes me back to that beginning. But remember, 99% of the people that you know won't carry a knife. But if you perceive that you live in a world where knife crime is prevalent, if you live in a world where gun crime is around every corner, then that will increase your chances of carrying a weapon if that's what you're thinking. So bear that in mind. And again, probably take you back to being a good friend in the first instance. So this is not all about reporting someone that you don't know, this mysterious, bad person character. Actually, in a lot of cases, this will be a friend who discloses that they've got something in a bag, for emergencies or for defensive reasons. And I think as a good friend, that's where you guys come in. So let's look at effects. Let's go from effects. We've looked at legislation. We've looked at some of the myths about who carries and why they carry. Let's look at some of the effects. Well, the obvious effects are the injuries. And you might hear, from some of our presenters, people talking about their experiences around knives. As a police officer, the effects that I see more than anything else are the effects on family. So for every person that either carries a weapon and is prosecuted or is injured by a weapon, there's a family. And that family are trying their best to get you through this event, whether it's helping you with your injuries recover, or whether it's trying to understand, why was my loved one in that place at that time and why did this happen? So it's really effective on the families. The other thing I would say, and college is probably the perfect place to get it across, will be it can affect your job prospects. So possession of a weapon, to give you an idea, for someone who's over 16, the Crown Prosecution Service would suggest that we charge that person. And that means that you will go to a court, whether that's a magistrate's or a Crown Court, depends on the severity of the event. But in any case, what you may be looking at is something in terms of a punishment at the end of that case that will affect what employment you can have. It will be a criminal record and it will be disclosable. Sometimes you may be eligible for a caution if you've no criminal history and you've admitted to the offence and there's no mitigation, etc., etc. But if you're going into a trusted occupation like teaching, like the police, like nursing, those offences are still disclosable and your employee would have access to those records and in an advanced search. So it's really important that if you're sat here listening thinking, I've got the knife in my bag for an emergency, in case I get robbed again, think about how we can start dealing with that better so that you're protecting yourselves from an employment point of view. So what do you do with it? Well, if you've got the knife, if your friend's got the knife, then Greater Manchester Police have the Forever Amnesty. So in all the main police stations within Manchester, what we call divisional headquarters, there will be an amnesty bin. And it is legal to take your weapon and put it in that bin without a crime being recorded. And I would say, please be aware of COVID regulations and restrictions, but if the difference is between having the weapon and there being a risk and not having the weapon by depositing it in one of our bins, then please deposit it. If you're really struggling to get it to a police station, I would suggest ringing 101 or making contact online to your local neighbourhood policing team, of which you can find on the GMP website, and ask, can someone come to collect whatever it may be. It may well be at home. You've got a family member or a friend with flick knives or other knives, hunting knives, machetes, things that they don't need, things that will only ever present problems later on down the line. And I would say use this process to get those weapons recovered as well. So that's everything. I still want to finish on the fact, please remember 99% of the people that you know won't carry a weapon, won't carry a firearm. I think that's really, really important. Sites that are good to look at, legislation.gov, the GMP website, because you can find out who your local policing team are and you can make contact with them should you need. There's other things through Childline, there's other things that your college will signpost you to that will offer that support through some of these pressures. And I hope that you find this input and the inputs from Dave, Poz, 8-4 Youth and the Youth Justice team at Bolton to be really interesting and useful. So have a great day. Thank you very much for listening and take care.